responses to the need for clustered housing on agricultural land so that young farmers can afford to buy into a farming future. As it stands now, only the wealthy can afford to buy agricultural lands. An OPAL program for young farmers, it says in parentheses. Any ideas on that? The guy that on the bill for that is, I guess, Bill. Bill, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so farm worker housing is as you know, one of the four prongs, one of the four aspects of the affordable housing problem. And the definition of a farm worker is also changing. So we're now seeing a shift from farmer employees to collaborative or cooperative kind of farming. So we need to actually broaden the definition of farm worker to be able to recognize these new farming models. We also need to allow for the denser housing necessary to be able to satisfy the farm workers and allow them to collect, be a farm worker even though they're working maybe multiple farms. Because I'm also aware of situations where a farm worker works in multiple farms. So I think that's a critical element, but it also has to be targeted at farm workers, right? We don't want non-farm workers using farm worker housing. So that's one of the elements. It needs to be addressed in the overall plan, but the other ones do too, otherwise we're going to get pressure on this new source of housing for non-farm kind of labor, and now we're defeating our own purposes here. So I'm a strong supporter of ag. Farm worker housing is one of those. It needs to be decoupled from the property tax program that's currently required to be able to actually have farm worker housing, so that actually the land owners can actually develop the housing for the workers that are doing the farm work for us.
Yes, so we actually were in Waldron on Tuesday for our county council meeting, and this was a subject that came up because Waldron has pretty restrictive, their sub-area plan's fairly restrictive, and one of the questions was, I've got 40 acres, but I can't divide it. I can't sell a small 1 acre portion of this 40 acre development because of a lot of the regulations with the county, and that's one of the things that I'd love to see change. I mean, I completely agree in clustered farming housing. It's just we have to change the code to let us do it, and there will be a fight from certain entities in this community to do that. But one of the things that we have to get rid of, and I know when I wanted to build a house on our property that's ag resource land, and we had a 1,000 square foot house, the county said I couldn't do it. So I had to go through the simple land division process and then give up 65% of my land to a conservation easement. That was found unconstitutional, or the state it overturned it, but it's still on the book, so we need to get rid of that. So the first thing we need to get rid of is so that, if you do two, let's say you even have the density to redo it, which is a whole other subject where I think we need to look at ag resource land and rural farm forest and look at smaller densities of like 5 acres, so we can actually give people the ability to take a 5 acre parcel and turn it into 1-4 and 1-1 and have it be your 6 acre parcel, so that it's still our 5. But a lot of it's how we have a chance in the comprehensive plan update to make all these changes, so that's what's exciting about the next couple of years. We can finally open the book up and change some things.
Bob?
Cluster housing, cluster areas. I'm all in favor of looking at every possibility that does. When it comes to farm labor, basically, if you look at it, it's any labor is what they call it. We've always attached it to farm labor to provide housing for your laborers or your employees. In a case, take a look at a large contractor. He's got a lot of property and that sort of stuff. A contractor should be able to put 2 or 3 houses on that property that he can rent out to either people that he's hiring, short-term or long-term rentals, or whatever. I look at that as the same as farm housing, the same as a contractor or anybody. A grocery store owner that owns a large parcel of land wants to put in places of that to provide housing for people that are working in his business or business, whatever. But clustering of housing to look at solving this issue, I think, is the way to go. And the smaller, tiny homes are the ones that are moving in the future. The younger generation seems to think that they can live in a smaller square foot print than most of us probably sitting in this room.
Michael?
Well, I touched on this in my opening remarks, that I think we need to move towards rezoning, and especially farmland, I think is a good opportunity for farm stay, and combine that with some other temporary worker stay, whether it's just for the summer, people to get their feet on the ground and be able to get a job. I know in my businesses I've trying to hire people and they come here and they don't have any housing. But if there was some short-term temporary housing available for them, work for the summer, they're here on the island, they can find another place for the winter if they want to stay. So I think we can combine both the farm workers and other laborers.
Anybody have another comment on that? Yes, but.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I guess maybe I'm the odd man out here, but I think farm worker housing is for farm workers. Farmers have to live on the land that they're working, right? They're there taking care of the fields, and the crops, and the animals. That's sort of a 24-hour job. Been there, done that. You can't live in town and commute out to the farm when something happens. Whereas, you know, construction workers or other professional workers don't necessarily, in fact, they don't live on the job, right? So they need to be in our urban growth areas. That's where we're supposed to be building our densification, and we can do that in much larger configurations, increasing the height limits, increasing the densities in our urban growth areas so that we can actually accommodate that, and you get a savings of scale by having a denser population of housing on a single parcel than spreading it around into farmlands. Let's keep the farmlands available to farm, allow farm worker housing to live on the farms, and actually do the work.
Anybody else have a follow-up response to that? A follow-up question? Yes, sir.
Well, that question was directed towards mostly young farmers who want to own their own farm. I noticed that a lot of the people up there today discussed sort of a feudal system where, you know, wealthy have a big piece of property, they want to build houses that they can rent out to somebody, or for their workers to work their farm. I was talking more about the next stage. In other words, we have interns that work on farms here now, but the next step is for them to actually own a stake. And that's not going to happen unless there are smaller, you know, increments of land that are used for agriculture are available. And that's really not the case anymore. So that's what I was really getting at there on not just a farm worker, a farmer, farm owner. You know, in other words, you would have a cluster, and I believe that there is something in the UDC and in the comprehensive plan right now that supposedly does address that, saying that they could take a 20-acre piece of agricultural land if it was associated with a 5-acre piece of rural farm forest and do the cluster housing up to 10 or something like that on that associated piece of rural farm forest. So I'd like, you know, kind of a response to that.
Right, so we really need you guys to have real nice, concise questions for these guys, because we want to hear we're not voting for you, although we need your voice to be heard. We need to hear what these guys think about stuff, so we need to really think about what you're saying and make it into a question for me, so we can get these guys. So somebody want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll go. I see your point now. I see your point now. The thing is, though, is to get to that point where we could bust up a larger piece of land. Say, for example, you have a 40-acre piece. There was a young guy there that was, young family there that was working the property. You wouldn't be able to sell them 2 acres to be able to cut that piece up and let them go on there. But if it's zoned R10 and we cut that up and sell it off to another one, that's what we'd have to look at to do that. But that would make it more affordable for someone to come in if they're just going to buy. Because on 2 acres of ground, you can produce a lot of food in today's market with the hydroponics and everything else that is available to a person. And with our farmers markets, it is a source of revenue. But for a person to go out and have to buy 20 acres of ground, they're not going to be able to afford it. But if you could bust that up into 2 acres or 3 acres, you know, proportionally, it's affordable for a young person to start. At least it'll get them a start. I see your point.
I mean, I was trying to say that. I mean, that was a discussion we had on Walden a couple days ago, and I agree. I mean, although I think we need to take an inventory of all of the ag land or potential ag land. We're doing this with the DSP program, so we'll have an idea of, we're going around and legally marking like hays here and livestock's here, so we have an idea, because there has to be a balance of larger farms, you know, for haying and other operations, but accessible land for the young folks that are here. I mean, the Orcas Farm Song group and those guys have been talking about how do we get 1-acre parcels, and so I agree, but the first thing we have to do is we have to get rid of that part that has a conservation easement on it, and you do a simple land division. Because if you have 40 acres and it's R5, you can split that up a couple times, But each time you get stuck with this conservation easement on there. And so that becomes, you know, if you have your 40-acre parcel, the first one, then you're gonna lose 35% now, even though it was 65%. So you kind of get less and less land that you can utilize. So if we get rid of that, it's already been said to be constitutional, or, you know, the Supreme Court kicked it out, and we just haven't gotten to it yet. So I completely agree with you. And hearing that on Waldron with 5 different families that are under 30 saying we'd like to do this, you know, it's definitely something to look into and to move forward. So if I get elected, it's something I will try to do in the next term. I mean, you have good vision, and sometimes it doesn't happen, but it's a good point. I agree with you.
Anybody else have a comment?
Well, we have, the zoning would be the big issue to overcome, and so we'll have to look into the zoning and how to deal with that, as Rick says, and Bob and Bill. You know, we've got, in Crow Valley, we have 40 acres. They're great to drive by and look at the huge farms, open fields. We don't want, you know, do we want that cut up into 5-acre parcels or 1-acre parcels? So we'll really have to look at it and see where in the islands we can do this, and what makes sense for the island itself, and also the farmer or the individual coming in to farm.
Definitely a problem. Owning land in the St. Juans is expensive, regardless of what kind of land it is. If we were going to approach it carving up farmland, then I would certainly make sure it's restricted to actually stay as farmland versus, you know, becoming residential lots. But we already have quite a bit of farmland that is available for leasing and farming, and without the cost of ownership. And why not utilize that first? Get the farmers here, lease them the land that's available today. And these are big parcels, you know. Some of it's owned by land banks, some of it's owned by preservation trust, some of it's owned by private property owners. So we don't need to start carving up the country right now to actually do farming. Now, you're right, someone might want to own the farm they're on, and I understand that rationale, right? So, but we got a big need right now to be able to farm land that's already available and for farming that doesn't have farmers.